As the world's largest economies, China and the US are significant players in combating climate change. While the US leadership on climate change is being withdrawn, the Chinese government has repeatedly affirmed its intention to fulfill its commitments under the Paris Agreement and continues to push its domestic decarbonization agenda. The survey that we're going to launch today acknowledged the critical role of the public in climate actions and low-carbon development. The results send a strong signal of public support in China and the US and indicate a big potential of engaged actions. We believe in the value and imperative of this social support in pushing forward low-carbon development, transition of the two economies, and trust this will contribute to the momentum building of the world in global climate governance. The survey also provides insights on what the gaps are in public understanding of climate change, what key narratives we have to strengthen in order to drive more stakeholder engagement, as well as where to find the leverage to translate this awareness to actions. So people say there are 1,000 hamlets in the eyes of 1,000 men, but in the eyes and minds of most Chinese American public, as well as the public all over the world, there's only one common future that we all want. That is a world whose temperature rise is capped below 2 degrees and 1.5 if possible, and the planet that does not blow its carbon budget. Solving the global warming challenge is definitely within our collective reach, but we really need to move fast. Thank you very much.
The fundamental question has to be, in the end, how do we mobilize this consciousness in the United States among the global public there, the consciousness of the Chinese people and the consciousness of people all around the world to really make a difference, to believe in the processes of government that have to do their job and not kind of avoid them or shun them, to believe in local authorities and their accountability, to use the power of their purchasing to change the attitudes of large corporations and small corporations. So how do we mobilize this real goodwill to act on climate change so we really bend the needle fast? Because what we know right now is it's not a question of if we're going to do it, it's a question of whether we're going to do it in time.
And it's very meaningful especially for China, in China, to do this kind of, to collect the public perspective and to see what's the public awareness and how to mobilize the public participation in addressing climate change. I believe most of you have realized and heard about that China made a lot of effort on climate change, this kind of battling. But what's the public opinion? Does it mean only the central government who pay more attention on climate change? Does it mean, it's only the government who want to join the international cooperation on climate change? So we test this kind of questions this year to say what's the difference compared with 5 years ago. And thus we can provide the data to the government and the multi-stakeholders to help them to design their action plan. But in China, there are big areas which we call rural area. So in this survey, the key principle is that we cover not only the cities, but also the rural areas. And another principle is that we cover not only to consider the gender perspective. Yeah. And I think it's a very important perspective to design this kind of survey as well. People believe climate change is happening. And more people believe it's because of human activities. More people worry about climate change. I think it's a very exciting data for us when we do the research. We found that more than 96% of Chinese, they support China's decision to participate in the Paris Agreement 2 years ago. although US announced that they will withdraw from the Paris Agreement. More than 94% Chinese, they support China stay in the Paris Agreement to implement this great agreement and address climate change as promised.
Climate change is still seen as a distant problem. Distant in time, that the impacts won't be felt for a generation or more. And distant in space, that this is about polar bears or developing countries, but not the United States, not my state, not my community, not my friends and family, or any of the people and places I care about. And as a result, it's psychologically distant. It's one of those issues that's out there. I kind of wish maybe somebody would do something about, but I don't see how it connects to my life. I don't see how it connects to my values. I don't see why it's an urgent priority. So this still is a huge communication challenge within the United States, is to help people take this abstract idea of climate change and connect it to our daily lives. Overwhelmingly, 77% of Americans, more than 3 out of 4, support the United States' participation in the Paris Agreement. And moreover, when we explain to them that President Trump has chosen to withdraw the United States from the Paris Agreement, overwhelmingly 64% of Americans say they oppose that decision. And note that the people who strongly oppose, 45%, are more than almost 3.5 to 1 over those that support President Trump's decision. And moreover, when we look at the national level, Americans overwhelmingly have reached a consensus about the value of this transition to clean energy. And these are big consensus statements. These are Republicans and Democrats. These are liberals and conservatives who support the development of clean energy. Essentially, this transition from relying on a 19th century energy system that still involves digging things out of the ground and setting them on fire in order to generate electricity, to an energy system of the 21st century that is safe, clean, cheap, and inexhaustible. And Americans want that transition. They want that transition to start yesterday, and they want it to be accelerated. How do we bring climate change home is one of the critical communication challenges, I think, for the entire world, not just for these two countries.
I worked on An Inconvenient Truth with former Vice President Gore, and we had the value then of getting 90 minutes of people's time to create a narrative around climate change. It's very difficult to get 90 minutes of anyone's time on anything. And because the bar, the scientific hurdle, is a little bit high on climate change to get people to see it's real, it's caused by us, it's happening now, and you can solve it, right? I mean, it takes a little bit of time for people to understand the mental leaps. Then with all the things that are capturing all of our attention, especially in Europe, the United States, and elsewhere, it does make it a difficult problem to address. So I look at those as some particular things that are challenges. They can be overcome, but I think this the areas of doubt and solution aversion, some of the particular geographic issues we have in the U.S., intensity and attention span are some of the things that I think underlie some of the data that I know Tony would have loved to have dived into if he'd had another 15 minutes to speak to you today.
What comes over in both of those sets of data, and is true absolutely everywhere in the world and with all the colleagues that I work with around the world, is it does matter when you take it home, and the weather and the air you breathe is a hugely, hugely, hugely effective tool in all of this. And people do get it. And that's happening more and more and more, and is something that we really see. The impact of the literally toxic air in India, in Delhi, over the last few days, the public information and the public mind impact of that has been absolutely huge. And we're just getting early data out of India on that. And I think a lot of those events are going to really play. It is a shame that we have to reach those kind of catastrophic outcomes before we can get people to listen, but it is a useful part of the toolbox.
Coal is the main source of pollution pollution. We must develop the new energy. And the 96.8% people think Chinese government should go out and cooperate with the world company. Yeah, this is the key word. And 98.7% people support the education on climate change. So that's why we supported the UNDP.
We cannot go to ask each Chinese, what's your attitude towards the central government or local government's actions? But at least we can research on the sample to make sure we get the general understandings. Yeah, that's what we can do currently, and we would like to share with the international communities that we can see how to work together. Yeah, China and other countries. And better, hopefully we can drag US back to this international community that we can work together for our, future, right? Yeah.